On May 12, 2026, the President of the United States looked at Iran's latest ceasefire proposal, the one Tehran spent nearly a week carefully constructing, the one that was supposed to represent their most serious diplomatic effort, and he didn't finish reading it. He called it garbage and threw it back. Not metaphorically. He read part of it, stopped, and rejected it. That moment tells you everything you need to know about where this conflict stands right now and where it is almost certainly heading in the next 72 hours. Because here's what was in that proposal. Iran demanded full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, an internationally recognized waterway that no single nation owns under any framework of maritime law. They demanded war reparations. They demanded the lifting of every sanction. They demanded an immediate end to the naval blockade. And then, when it came to nuclear concessions, the Central American demand, the non-negotiable requirement that has been on the table since the beginning, they pushed it to a later date. No timeline, no framework, no commitment. Just, we'll discuss that eventually, maybe, in some future conversation that we're not committing to having. That's not a negotiation. That's a stall with extra steps. And Washington has now said so publicly, officially, and with the specific visual language of posting images of MQ-9 Reaper drones turning Iranian fast attack boats into wreckage on Truth Social. That image is not accidental. That image is a message to the 800 or so fast attack craft the IRGC currently has dispersed across coastal tunnels, caves, and bays along southern Iran, including the roughly 100 visible in satellite imagery north of the strait near the Keshem coast right now. The message is simple. We know where they are. We know what eliminates them. And the ceasefire that's holding this situation together is, in the president's own words, on massive life support. So let's talk about what comes next, because the Wall Street Journal story that dropped recently just changed the entire strategic picture of who's actually fighting this war. And the answer to that question now includes a third country that nobody expected to confirm as a direct combatant. First, understand what Iran is actually working with and why the Mosquito fleet doctrine exists in the first place. Because dismissing it, treating 500 to 1,000 armed fast attack boats as an irrelevant threat because American technology is so overwhelming, would be the same strategic error that has gotten analysts wrong about asymmetric warfare repeatedly across modern military history. The lesson the IRGC learned from Operation Praying Mantis in 1988 was direct and humiliating. In a single day, the United States Navy destroyed roughly half of Iran's conventional surface fleet. One day, half the fleet. The institutional shock of that event shaped everything the IRGC Navy built for the next 4 decades. The conclusion they reached was not, we need a better conventional Navy. The conclusion was, never fight the United States Navy on equal terms. Not ever. Not under any circumstances. Build something that the conventional kill chain isn't optimized for. Build something that exploits geography rather than fighting against it. Build something so cheap and numerous that losing individual units doesn't degrade the overall capability the way losing a frigate does. What they built over 40 years is the Mosquito fleet, and it is a doctrine, not a weakness. The IRGC genuinely believes this is their most viable military instrument precisely because they knew their conventional fleet would be eliminated early in any serious confrontation with American forces. They planned for its loss. The Mosquito fleet is the backup that was designed to be the primary weapon all along. The specific craft in the current IRGC inventory include the Paykop and Zulfiqar-class fast-guided missile boats, roughly 14 tons each, diesel-powered, capable of 50-plus knots, crewed by 3 personnel. They run low on the waterline, which creates a radar detection problem. By the time conventional surface radar picks them up, they may already be inside the decision window needed to protect a commercial ship. They carry 12.7 millimeter heavy machine guns, Kausar anti-ship missiles, and the Noor 802, a Chinese derivative weapon that has brought Chinese engineering into this fight, whether Beijing acknowledges that role publicly or not. The swarm doctrine's effectiveness comes from vector diversity and saturation timing. A single fast attack boat approaching an American destroyer is not a threat that the Aegis system has trouble managing. The system tracks it, prioritizes it, and eliminates it before it reaches weapons range. The doctrine is designed around the scenario where that logic breaks down, where simultaneous approach vectors from multiple compass directions create the specific interference condition where engaging one threat creates a window for another to close distance from a different angle. Not because American technology can't track all of them, it can, but because the geometry of simultaneous engagement from multiple vectors taxes defensive systems in ways that sequential attacks from a single direction do not. Three structural vulnerabilities define the fleet's real limitations in this conflict: zero air cover, no organic electronic warfare capability, and absolute inability to survive engagement with armed helicopters in open water. The May 4th action confirmed all three in approximately 12 minutes. 6 boats went to the bottom before any of them reached a position to threaten American assets meaningfully. The AH-64 Apache is what happened to those 6 boats. And the Apache is not the only thing in this theater that's been designed to answer the Mosquito fleet problem. Let's walk through the kill chain that Project Freedom Plus would bring to bear against 500 to 1,000 dispersed fast attack craft. Because understanding this architecture is what separates genuine threat assessment from either panic or dismissal. The MQ-9 Reaper is the platform that the Trump social media post this morning highlighted for a reason. The MQ-9 is often discussed primarily in its surveillance role: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. But in this theater, it's deployed in its armed configuration, carrying Hellfire missiles. The Hellfire's versatility matters here. The standard variant carries a shape-charged warhead. The R9X variant, sometimes called the Flying Ginsu, extends a series of blades on impact rather than detonating explosively, eliminating the target through kinetic penetration without the blast radius that creates collateral damage concerns. Against a fast attack boat, either variant is decisive. The MQ-9 can carry a significant load of these missiles, can loiter over the operational area for many hours, and can execute strikes on targeting data generated by its own sensors or fed from other platforms in the network. The A-10 Thunderbolt II deserves the same emphasis it received in previous analysis of this conflict. The GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel 30mm Gatling cannon firing depleted uranium penetrators at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, is the weapon that every fast attack boat crew should be thinking about. The A-10's loiter capability, its tolerance for battle damage, and its sustained rate of fire make it the ideal platform for an engagement that lasts longer than the single-pass geometry that high-performance jets produce. It can stay in the fight. It can keep firing. And a fiberglass fast attack boat absorbing a burst from the GAU-8 does not continue its attack run. The AH-64 Apache pairs with both platforms as the maritime engagement layer whose effectiveness has already been documented. Apache Hellfire missiles engage boats at ranges where the boat's weapons cannot reach the helicopter. The helmet-mounted targeting system allows the pilot to engage targets in whatever direction they're looking, rather than requiring the aircraft to point at the target, making angular acquisition of fast-moving surface contacts in confined straight geometry significantly faster than fixed forward weapons employment. The F-15E Strike Eagle adds the strafing capability that attack formations train for specifically in scenarios involving fast attack craft in the Gulf. This is not theoretical. Pilots who have deployed to this region have trained against this exact threat profile, knowing that the Strait of Hormuz and the IRGC Mosquito fleet has been the most likely near-peer asymmetric naval engagement scenario for American forces in the Middle East for decades. But the most strategically efficient option, the one that addresses the problem before it becomes an engagement in the water, is eliminating the boats in their coastal staging areas before before they disperse into swarm geometry. A fast attack boat destroyed in a coastal cave or tunnel system before it receives a launch order is not participating in a swarm attack. The GBU-72 5,000-pound penetrator has already been used in this conflict against hardened coastal infrastructure. The same weapon systems applied to the staging locations that satellite imagery has documented, combined with the visual targeting data from Sentinel-2 that recent boat formations have voluntarily provided, creates a pre-launch strike option that removes the saturation problem before it can develop in the water. The clutter advantage that makes the Mosquito fleet tactically viable depends on radar confusion in confined waterway environments. When the Aegis combat systems on Arleigh Burke destroyers, the APG-81 sensors on F-35s, the surveillance feeds from Global Hawks and MQ-9s, and the airborne battle management picture from E-2D Hawkeyes are all working as an integrated network rather than independent platforms. The clutter advantage disappears. The boats become a fixed target list rather than an invisible swarm. And a fixed target list is a fundamentally different tactical problem than a radar clutter exploiting asymmetric threat. Now here's the development that the Wall Street Journal story revealed and that transforms the strategic picture of this conflict from a bilateral confrontation into something considerably more complex for Tehran to manage. The UAE has been confirmed as a direct combatant. In early April, around the time the initial ceasefire was being announced, Emirati Mirage 2009 jets struck Iran's Lavon oil island refinery in the Persian Gulf. The attack sparked a significant fire and knocked offline a facility processing approximately 55,000 barrels of oil per day. Iran acknowledged the strike, describing it as an enemy attack, and responded with a barrage against the UAE and Kuwait. Abu Dhabi has now officially become the third confirmed combatant in this conflict alongside the United States and Israel. And that changes the strategic geometry for Tehran in ways that matter operationally. An attack axis into Iran that the regime cannot publicly attribute to Washington complicates the information management picture that the IRGC depends on for its domestic narrative. If the strikes are American, the regime can frame them as imperialist aggression and rally nationalist sentiment. If they're Emirati, that framing breaks down. The UAE is a neighboring Arab state. Attributing strikes to Abu Dhabi and rallying the Iranian public against the Emirates as the enemy is a considerably harder sell than the anti-American narrative the regime has been running for 71 days. The UAE's participation also means Iran's strategic targeting decisions have been clearly failing to achieve their desired deterrent effect. Iran hit the UAE with 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and 4 drones on May 4th, simultaneously with its assault on American naval assets and commercial shipping. Most were intercepted by the UAE's THAAD system and Patriot batteries. But one drone got through and struck the Fujairah Petroleum Industrial Zone, igniting a significant fire at an oil terminal that sits at the end of the only pipeline giving the UAE a meaningful bypass route around the strait. That pipeline moves 1.5 million barrels per day through the Gulf of Oman, around the blockade Iran created. The logic of that strike reveals Iran's comprehensive strategy. Not just close the strait to everyone else's oil, but eliminate the bypass routes that Gulf states are using to keep their own exports moving around the closure. It is the Russian doll of blockades, a blockade against the blockade workaround. And it injured 3 Indian nationals working at the facility. Iran struck a pipeline serving its own Gulf neighbors, injured workers from a country it cannot afford to alienate further, and in doing so, converted the UAE from a passive supporter of the American position into a confirmed military participant with its own operational axes into Iranian territory. The deterrent effect the missile campaign was supposed to produce, Gulf states distancing themselves from American operations out of fear, produced the opposite result. Again, France has now sent a strategic aircraft carrier to the operational area. The coalition that was American only in the conflict's early phase is acquiring additional members, tentatively, cautiously, with the specific hesitation that European strategic culture produces in situations requiring military commitment before the political consensus catches up to the operational reality. But the direction is clear. The international isolation that Iran hoped to avoid by keeping the strait closed and applying economic pressure to the world is not materializing. The pressure is bouncing back. The China dimension is the wild card that no analysis can resolve with confidence right now. President Trump is scheduled for a summit in Beijing on May 14th and 15th, the first American presidential visit to the Chinese capital in a decade. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has confirmed that Iran will be a central discussion topic. China recently hosted Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi and has positioned itself as a potential back channel for reopening the strait. But here's the analytical problem with the China as mediator scenario. China can tell Iran's foreign minister to make a deal. Araghchi can agree that a deal needs to be made. And then both of them run into the same wall that every external actor runs into when trying to influence the trajectory of this conflict. The IRGC doesn't answer to Iran's diplomatic apparatus. The foreign minister can be instructed to pursue peace, can genuinely want to pursue peace, and can be completely unable to deliver the IRGC's compliance with any agreement he reaches. This is the institutional fracture that external mediators keep underestimating. Two Irans are negotiating simultaneously, and only one of them has the weapons. What does Iran actually want from this negotiation? Because the proposal that Trump threw back wasn't accidentally maximalist, it was deliberately so. Understanding why reveals the strategy behind the stall. Iran wants time. Time to reconstitute degraded military capabilities. Time to rebuild the institutional coherence that 71 days of battlefield losses and internal power struggle have fractured. Time to get China positioned as a counterweight in any negotiating framework so that the bilateral pressure from Washington is diluted into a multilateral process where Beijing's interests create diplomatic cover for Tehran's positions. Time to push the global economic pain from the strait closure to a level where other nations, European governments with fragile energy security, Asian industrial economies dependent on Gulf oil, apply their own pressure on Washington to accept a settlement that leaves more of Iran's core interests intact than a continued blockade would produce. The proposal asking for sovereignty over an international waterway, war reparations, and sanctions relief while deferring nuclear discussions indefinitely is not a serious opening position designed to be negotiated toward a settlement. It is a document designed to consume calendar time while the clock runs on the CIA's 3 to 4 month endurance estimate. Every week of negotiation in which Iran isn't conceding anything meaningful is a week in which the blockade's maximum economic pressure hasn't produced a regime-threatening outcome. The problem with this strategy, as it has been the problem with every IRGC strategic calculation in this conflict, is that the American side has already anticipated it and named it publicly. Calling the proposal garbage and announcing that the ceasefire is on massive life support is not impulsive. It is the deliberate removal of the diplomatic runway that the stalling strategy requires. Project Freedom paused when Pakistan requested space for talks. Project Freedom Plus resumes when those talks are confirmed to be in bad faith. The confirmation came in the form of a proposal that asked for everything and offered nothing. So here's where the next 72 to 96 hours resolve. Either Iran produces a substantively different proposal, one that actually engages with nuclear concessions, actually addresses the American core demands rather than deferring them indefinitely, actually represents a regime decision to accept the diplomatic off-ramp before the military escalation resumes, or Project Freedom Plus begins with a first phase that looks very much like what the Trump social media post this morning depicted. MQ-9 Reapers working through a target list of fast attack boat staging areas, Apaches and A-10s addressing anything that disperses into open water, the 3-carrier strike group architecture providing air cover and strike capability that exceeds anything the IRGC can field in response. The boats know what happened on May 4th. 6 of their colleagues went to the bottom in 12 minutes. There are now potentially 800 to 1,000 of them dispersed along the coast, and the American order of battle has 3 carrier strike groups in theater. The math of that comparison is not ambiguous. Iran's Mosquito fleet is bringing its doctrine to a conflict where the bug zappers have been counted, positioned, armed, and are waiting for the authorization to start. The A-10 Warthog, the AH-64 Apache, the MQ-9 Reaper, the FA-18 Super Hornet, the F-15E Strike Eagle, the UAE's Mirage jets operating from a third axis that complicates Iranian defensive planning and narrative management simultaneously. The ceasefire is on massive life support. The proposal was called garbage. The imagery being posted from Washington shows exactly what comes next if the next proposal looks like the last one. And somewhere in Tehran, 2 factions are having the argument that determines whether Project Freedom Plus launches in the next 72 hours, or whether someone with the institutional authority and the strategic clarity to understand what the operational reality requires manages to produce something different. Mustafa Salami and the Iran-Iraq war generation know what drinking poison tastes like. They've watched an institution swallow it before, rather than fight past the point where fighting is possible. Whether that generation's institutional memory is enough to overcome the IRGC hardliners who still believe the Mosquito fleet changes the math, that's the question that determines everything that happens next in the Strait of Hormuz. Tell me what you think in the comments. Does Iran come back with a real proposal in the next 72 hours? Or does Project Freedom Plus launch before the week is out? I want your read on which faction inside Tehran actually controls what happens next. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now, because when this moves, it moves fast. And we are going to be here with the full breakdown before anyone else has the complete picture. Full audio on Spotify if you're on the move. Watch the next video that's queued up right now. Don't miss what's coming.